Brazen.
Okay, so platform number 5, and so we're off to Brussels. So, yeah, we've got about 20 odd minutes to board.
This is how William Verez's quest to stay out of prison begins. It is June 2022. He and I are at St Pancras Station in London. We are here to catch the Eurostar to Belgium, where Verez has set up a meeting with a friend, a man called Angelo Chiantia.
He's a Sicilian, late 50s, early 60s maybe. These people are often in Italy called professionally unemployed people. They live all their lives on the edge of legality, possibly.
Verez has known Angelo for about 30 years, and now he wants Angelo to help him search for a Caravaggio painting that hasn't been seen since it was stolen from a Sicilian church in 1969. The Sicilian mafia are suspected of taking it, and it's not just any painting. It's the one Verez needs to find to stay out of prison. Verez is alleged to have trafficked over $40 million in stolen antiquities. He's facing a sentence of up to 20 years. But if he can locate the Caravaggio and get it back, he hopes prosecutors will cut him a deal.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board this Eurostar to Lille and Brussels.
Once we have stowed our luggage and found our seats, Verez tells me more about Angelo. He wants to meet with Angelo because he has, let's say, useful friends.
He does know members of the mafia. When he was young, he was offered membership, if that's the way you want to put it, and he refused.
According to Verez, Angelo's contacts include Sicilians who manage money for jailed mafiosi.
People who tour towns in Sicily looking after the interests of people who are in prison for a long time. So called gastolo in Italy, which basically means often multiple life sentences.
If Angelo can get to those mafia contacts, he could be a crucial link in the chain that will lead Verez to the painting.
So from there he could go higher up into the command of the mafia. Now,
the idea is to use Angelo as a kind of messenger or spy, have him ask questions, identify contacts, and bring back information about the Caravaggio.
Of course, we need a certain rules of engagement. We have to first of all find out that they're prepared to give them back and under what circumstances, their conditions. We need photographs, which we will then show to the authorities.
Verez has some leverage with Angelo. The way Verez sees it, it's Angelo's fault that he's in trouble in the first place. Before the Sicilian police began investigating Verez, they were investigating Angelo. In 2015, the cops in Sicily started tapping his phone. And one day, the police heard Verez's voice down the line.
Angelo being tailed, of course, meant that other people who were in contact with him, such as myself, would be then monitored.
From this point on, it was only a matter of time for Verez. And when that morning came in 2018, when the police raided Verez's house in London, their colleagues in Sicily were arresting Angelo too. Since then, Angelo has made Verez's legal position even more complicated. While Verez denies the charges against him, Angelo has followed a different strategy.
Angelo cut a plea bargain for reasons that he possibly knows best himself. However, it's made our defence more difficult due to the fact that one person has admitted culpability.
So, the way Verez sees it, the least Angelo can do is act as his go-between. But what's in it for Angelo? Well, his rap sheet goes back more than a decade. The Sicilian police watch him constantly. If he can do the authorities a favour, maybe they'll go easy on him. And then there's the money. People who find stolen art sometimes get rewards. If Angelo can help with the search, he can share the prize. By now, we are speeding through the English countryside. As we head towards the Channel Tunnel, Verez gives me a word of warning. If you're going to deal with gangsters, even from a distance, you need to be careful. The identities of Angelo's sources need to be closely guarded.
Now, this is quite dangerous information, so one has to be careful, and of course that's where I would caution you.
Dangerous for Angelo, dangerous for Verez. Maybe even dangerous for me. From Brazen and PRX, this is The Professor. I'm Simon Willis. Episode 2, The Go-Between. Meet Angelo. Verez and I have arrived in Brussels, and we're sitting with him in a hotel lobby in the centre of town. Before today, I had only ever seen Angelo's mugshot, printed in a Sicilian newspaper at the time of his arrest. When I looked at it, I saw a hoodlum out of central casting, the dead-eyed stare, the rough, unshaven face, the grubby clothes. But today, Angelo is trim and tanned. He's wearing a natty blue blazer and spotless white jeans. He doesn't look like a hoodlum at all. He looks like a prosperous Italian on his summer holiday. But under the smart facade, there's something off. It's the way he doesn't look at me, but only at Verez, as though I'm not there, beneath his notice. It's a kind of power game, a signal that, although I've come with someone he knows well, he doesn't trust me.
Convegni magari.
Io sono sempre stato appassionato della gioielleria.
Angelo and Verez are talking about how they met. It was at those antiquities fairs that Verez used to go to, back in the 80s.
He was on the periphery of the coin dealers and antiquarians that I worked with in Sicily.
After he and Verez got to know each other at the fairs, they started a few side hustles together, exporting stuff from Sicily to the UK. All above board, you understand.
Lavoriamo con le cose legali, cose che si...
Angelo's saying they worked together on, quote, legal things that were normal by law. Olive oil, cheese, that kind of thing. To be honest, he's making such an effort not to sound suspicious that he sounds really suspicious. The authorities say Angelo was part of Verez's Sicilian gang of traffickers and helped him move looted art out of the country. But maybe the food business is partly true. When the Carabinieri were tapping Angelo's phone, they picked up chatter about a Sicilian fruit delivery business belonging to one of his contacts. When officers raided the premises of the fruit company, they found a bronze statue hidden in a crate. Their conclusion? That Verez and Angelo were plotting to traffic stolen artworks in lorries full of oranges and lemons. But whether Angelo was dealing in illegal things or not, in his world, contact with organised crime was inevitable. It was everywhere. Sometimes it even dropped dead on the street in front of you.
Negli anni 90 ci sono stati 100 più morti.
He says that even in the little Sicilian town he lived in, more than 100 people were gunned down during the mafia wars in the 1990s. Sicily's less violent now, but even today, saying the wrong thing about the wrong people can get you killed. If he can get to his mafia contacts, Angelo thinks he can get some answers about the Caravaggio.
Risposte che nessuno dice, che non esiste personalmente.
According to the rumours he has heard, the painting is still out there.
Personalmente penso che si può recuperare, ma ci vuole molto tempo.
And he thinks it can be recovered.
Okay, should we sit or do you want to stand?
It's a beautiful, bright winter morning in February 2023. I'm in a park in Naples with my interpreter Daria. We are here to meet a retired officer from the Carabinieri, Italy's police force. He's called Ferdinando Musella.
Mi sono ricordato di aver visto un documentario dove un agente dell'FBI parlava e raccontava...
Meeting in the park was his idea. He says that he remembers an old film in which an FBI agent meets a journalist in Central Park in New York. So, why not recreate the scene, he thought.
So you're like the FBI agent?
Quindi sei come un agente dell'FBI?
Forse meglio.
Maybe even better.
So here we are. The park overlooks the Bay of Naples. Through the mist we can see Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that destroyed Pompeii in 79 AD, smoking gently in the sunshine. Musella is surprisingly elegant for a cop, even an Italian one. tall, dark hair, and sharply dressed in a blue blazer, crisp white shirt and loafers. I've come to meet Musella because back in the 1990s, he took over the Italian art crime squad. And pretty much the first thing he did was to reopen the investigation into the theft of Caravaggio's Nativity. The case had been cold for years by that point. The original investigation, in 1969, went nowhere. A few weeks after the Caravaggio was taken, there was a mafia massacre in a Palermo suburb. The Sicilian police officers investigating the theft of the painting were reassigned to the murders instead. Then, as we heard in the last episode, in 1989, the mafioso Francesco Marino Manoia confessed to stealing the Caravaggio. But prosecutors never followed it up. They were too busy breaking the mafia's stranglehold on the drug business to investigate an art theft. Stories began to swirl about the fate of the Caravaggio. Lots of stories. Here's Arthur Brand, the so-called Indiana Jones of the art world.
One story says that it was eaten by rats. Others have declared, just recently, a few years ago, that the painting got in hands of a very famous mobster guy and he sold it to a Swiss art dealer. It has even been said that the Swiss art dealer cut the painting in pieces to sell it more easily. You know, if you sell a painting this big in one piece, everybody knows it's the stolen Caravaggio.
Faced with all these competing theories, how do you sort fact from fiction? Gangsters aren't exactly reliable witnesses. Sometimes an interview with a police officer or a prosecutor is an opportunity for them to tell the truth. But jailed mobsters also give evidence to spread confusion and obtain favours. A kind word from a cop to a judge about how helpful they have been and how they deserve a lighter sentence. Does that sound familiar? Favours. Isn't that what William Verres is after too? When Verres and his go-between Angelo say they think the painting can be recovered, should we believe them? Or are they just hucksters selling a story? That's why I want to talk to Musella, the Carabinieri officer, about his Caravaggio investigation. I want to know if he thinks the painting even still exists. So, Musella and I sit down on a park bench looking out to sea, and he tells me what he knows. Well, as much as he's allowed to. It's 1996. Musella is in an interview room at a police station in Rome. He has recently taken charge of the Carabinieri's art squad, and he's been looking through the files on the biggest unsolved case in the unit's archive.
And there I saw that the most important case, the most important file, was number 799, which was the file related to the theft of the Caravaggio.
Al furto del Caravaggio.
Musella has reopened the case, and he's here at the police station to conduct his first interview. Across the table is the only person to confess to the theft, the man we met in the last episode, Francesco Marino Manoia, a.k.a. the chemist. He ran the mafia's heroin labs, from which they supplied dealers and addicts all over the world in the 1980s. By this point, Manoia has been living in witness protection for years. Since he turned himself in, back in 1989, Italy's anti-mafia police have come to view him as the most trustworthy source they have ever had. Manoia's stories are always so specific, so precise, and they tend to check out. True to form, when Musella begins to question Manoia about the painting, his account is full of details. Here's Musella again.
Lui disse di aver partecipato al furto.
Manoia names the Palermo boss who commissioned the theft. He specifies the make of truck they used to carry the canvas away from the church. He locates the building in Palermo where the painting was taken. It was an old warehouse that had once been used as an ice factory. He even says what time of day it was when they unloaded the picture from the van. 10 a.m. Armed with these details, Musella starts to talk to other mafiosi to see if their stories overlap with Manoia's. And they do. He goes to see an old gangster who now runs a toy shop. This man also talks about the truck, the warehouse, and the Palermo boss, the one who commissioned the theft. And when Musella talks to that boss...
E lui, in sintesi...
And he, in summary, stated that he had the painting in his hands.
Di aver avuto il quadro tra le mani.
After just a few weeks, a consistent story is beginning to coalesce. But then, just as Musella is getting somewhere, his most promising line of inquiry gets shut down by the public prosecutor in Palermo, who has to approve investigations involving mafia witnesses. And when I ask him why, he becomes extremely cagey. All Musella will say is that it had something to do with one of the people he interviewed.
Il motivo è da ricercare.
The reason is to be found in something that happened in the aftermath of the second interview with Mangano.
He is talking about a mafioso called Vittorio Mangano. According to a witness, Mangano transported the painting from Palermo to Milan in the early 1970s, a few years after the robbery, in order to find a buyer. And that's interesting, because Mangano, who died in 2000, is an especially notorious figure in the mafia. Back in the 1970s, around the time that he moved the picture, Mangano was working in Milan for an up-and-coming entrepreneur and politician, a man by the name of Silvio Berlusconi. Now, before anyone gets ahead of themselves, we aren't about to find a stolen masterpiece in Berlusconi's basement. But this unexpected link to the former Italian Prime Minister is fascinating for a different reason. It may be a clue as to why the Caravaggio has remained lost for so long, and why it could take people like William Verres and Arthur Brand, rather than the police, to find it. More on that after the break. It was the early 1970s. Silvio Berlusconi was about to hit the big time.
Berlusconi has completed a very large real estate project, a suburban high-rise kind of development that makes him quite rich.
This is Alexander Stieler, the American journalist you heard from in the last episode.
And he's also beginning to develop the kind of suburban satellite city outside of Milan known as Milano 2, Milan 2, which is modeled on the American suburban gated community and ends up earning him a great deal of money.
Like many rich Italians, Berlusconi was terrified that he and his family would be kidnapped. Abduction was big business for the mafia in the 1970s. More often than not, wealthy targets would pay huge ransoms. So Berlusconi needed protection, and Vittorio Mangano seemed perfect for the job. He was a powerful member of the mafia, with an aquiline nose and large spectacles. A murderous thug with an air of elegance.
Mangano is developing a rather serious criminal record in Palermo for extortion. Among other things, he cuts off the heads of several dogs and sends them to the person he's looking to extort for money. So, that's the kind of person we're dealing with.
Berlusconi's logic was impeccable. What better way to protect yourself against mafia kidnappers than to hire a mafioso as your bodyguard? The strategy paid off. Around 1974, a Sicilian gang went to Milan to kidnap Berlusconi.
Io mi chiamo Gaspare Muto, insomma.
This is Gaspare Mutolo. He used to be a mafia hitman and murdered about 30 people. But since turning state's evidence in 1992, he has become a kind of anti-mafia campaigner. Coincidentally for our story, he now earns money as a painter, producing colourful seaside scenes and landscapes. When I called him earlier this year, he tried to sell me one of his pictures. But I wasn't in the market for art. I wanted to hear about the time he was sent to kidnap Silvio Berlusconi.
Quindi eravamo tutti pronti, eravamo...
So, we were all ready. And we were 16 people. We were ready because it was expected overnight that this entrepreneur would go to Milano 2.
Che questo imprenditore andava, diciamo, a Milano 2.
The plan, Mutolo is saying, was to nab Berlusconi on one of his trips to inspect his new real estate project. But then, Mutolo and his gang received a message from their bosses in Palermo. Do not touch Silvio. He's one of ours.
Va bene, ci andò, diciamo, un siciliano di nome Vittorio Mangano.
There was a Sicilian named Vittorio Mangano, who was the bodyguard. That was like the flag of the Sicilians. To say, this is not to be touched, because it belongs to Sicily.
Per dire questo non si tocca perché appartiene alla Sicilia.
Berlusconi wasn't alone. The mafia's control over southern Italy gave the organisation enormous influence in every walk of Italian life. Business, the courts, the security services, and most of all, politics.
It took me a while to understand the importance that organized crime has in Italian politics, and you really can't understand the one without understanding the other.
As a reporter covering the Italian mafia in the 80s and 90s, Alexander Stieler began to dig into their influence over the Italian state.
Organized crime dominates the economy of the bottom third of the country and ends up having a crucial role in the politics of the country.
Whoever was governing the country needed votes from southern Italy and Sicily to win office. And the mafia dictated how everyone voted. So for decades, there had been an understanding. The mafia would deliver the votes, and the politicians would reward the mafia. Mafia-run companies got lucrative government contracts and embezzled the proceeds. Jailed gangsters were allowed to control their criminal empires from prison. Judges, senior intelligence officials, politicians and business people were all suspected of colluding with Cosa Nostra. Caravaggio's Nativity became a symbol of the mafia's power. According to some rumours, Cosa Nostra's senior bosses even displayed it at meetings. Here's Arthur Brand again.
We all know the movies The Godfather. Sometimes the head of the mafia families come together in a reunion. And the story is that this painting is present there as some kind of symbolic thing. And even it goes so far that they say that new mafia bosses, when they are sweared in, they have to swear on this painting.
They had taken one of Italy's most valuable cultural treasures, and there was nothing the Italian government could do about it. But then, on May 23rd, 1992, everything changed. That afternoon, the weather in Sicily was sunny and warm. Giovanni Falcone, the anti-mafia investigator we met in the last episode, was barreling along the motorway towards Palermo from the airport. Next to him, sitting in the passenger seat, was his wife, Francesca. Falcone didn't get to drive often. His security detail considered it too dangerous for the mafia's biggest enemy to take the wheel himself. But this afternoon, they relented. Falcone had just gotten off a flight from Rome after a particularly grueling week, and his security would be following closely behind in a trio of police vehicles. So, just this once, they handed over the keys. The road into Palermo from the airport is beautiful. It winds along the coast between the Mediterranean and a chain of craggy mountains. And as Falcone headed home for the weekend, he enjoyed a rare moment of freedom and normality. It didn't last long.
A pile of mangled metal is all that remains of Judge Giovanni Falcone's escort car, suddenly brought to a halt.
The bomb, buried under the highway, contained over 500 kilos of explosives. The blast ripped Falcone's car to pieces and buried the wreckage under mountains of broken tarmac. Falcone and his wife were killed instantly, along with 3 of their bodyguards.
Rosaria Costa cursed the mafia today for turning Palermo into a city of blood. Her policeman husband and 2 other bodyguards were blown up along with Italy's top crime buster and his wife this weekend in the most dramatic mafia attack in decades.
It was immediately obvious that the mafia had carried out the assassination. The murkier question was, who else was involved? Falcone knew that his job was dangerous, and his movements were a closely guarded secret. So how did the mafia know exactly when he'd be driving along that road and when to press their detonator? Many suspected someone inside the government had tipped them off. Maybe, instead of trying to destroy the mafia, the deep state was trying to protect it.
Thousands of enraged Sicilians demanded justice today. They blamed Italy's political establishment as well as the mafia for the latest slaughter on the streets of Palermo.
The bomb that killed Giovanni Falcone, Italy's leading anti-mafia investigator, changed Italy.
There's a huge crackdown. The Italian state sends in 7,000 soldiers to Sicily to reinforce police presence. And there's just a flurry of activity. And in that, a whole bunch of new witnesses come forward. And people begin talking much more freely about the mafia politics connection.
As part of this frenzy of activity, journalists and prosecutors began to expose the links between the state and organised crime. And when Silvio Berlusconi entered politics in 1993 and became Prime Minister a year later, investigators turned their attention to him. One episode from Berlusconi's past intrigued them above all: the time that he had employed Vittorio Mangano, a high-ranking member of the mafia, at his house near Milan.
At the time, people are beginning to then suddenly say, wait a second, who exactly is this guy? How did he make his fortune? And then what about this old episode of this gangster who's working for Berlusconi? Shouldn't we know better exactly what was going on here?
Investigators suspected that Berlusconi's links with the mafia went deeper than employing a gangster as a bodyguard. His wealth had always been a mystery. How had he funded his real estate developments? As prosecutors and reporters unpicked Berlusconi's business affairs, they found previously undisclosed flows of money.
There were a series of anonymous Swiss companies that were the first big investors, and no one knows who was behind those investors, and that there were also large infusions of cash. We're talking about millions of dollars received by Berlusconi as part of this period of initial financing.
The investigators began to think that maybe Mangano had been more than a mere bodyguard. Maybe he was a channel the mafia used to launder money. Although Berlusconi himself escaped prosecution for these links, his right-hand man was jailed for mafia association. The Italian Supreme Court acknowledged that between 1974 and 1992, Berlusconi had a deal with Cosa Nostra.
This would be a perfect mechanism for something like the Sicilian Mafia in the 1970s, which is swimming in cash because of its growing heroin business. And there are not that many easy ways of recycling millions of dollars of cash.
So what does all this have to do with a stolen painting? Well, what it means is that when Ferdinando Musella, the head of the Italian art squad, went to interview Mangano, Berlusconi's old bodyguard, about the Caravaggio in 1997, he wasn't meeting any old gangster. He was meeting a man who knew the deepest secrets about the mafia's relationship with the state. And whatever he told Musella was obviously explosive, because according to Musella, his official report of his final meeting with Mangano has been classified, and he's not about to divulge the details.
If the Anti-Mafia Commission intended to keep those acts secret, I don't think it's appropriate to talk about those things.
After I spoke with Musella, I went back to William Verres and Arthur Brand. I wanted to know whether they had heard about Musella's investigation and the mysterious silence that surrounds Mangano's part in the Caravaggio story. They said they didn't know, but they weren't shocked either. Here's Brand.
If everything you tell me is correct, then it wouldn't surprise me that some informants said, look, this is the person who has the Caravaggio. And if that turned out to be a very close friend to Berlusconi, well, what do you think? It's not a surprise that people in Italy might have protection. Politics and mafia are so closely related in those areas that if a mafia boss goes down, many politicians go down too.
So, if a police investigation was called off due to pressure from above, could this be why the Italian authorities are interested in seeing what Brand and Verres can do with the case? Brand certainly thinks so.
There are cases in which the police is not allowed or doesn't want to crack a case. Sometimes it's easier to put somebody like me in front position, so they can always say, well, what he does, he's a free citizen, he can do whatever he wants. So there won't be any backlash. The police and I, they always say, Arthur, you are such a lucky guy, because if we want to talk to criminals, we have to file 6 pages of requests, and you just jump on your bicycle and go there. And then I always say, yeah, but you guys wear a gun.
Verres sees things the same way.
It doesn't surprise me that an investigation getting too near the truth was closed down. It's possible that there are still people out there who have something to do with this matter who could still be dangerous.
Oh, Simon.
Hi, how you doing? It's December 2022. Verres is in Sicily. He's there to see Angelo Chiantia, his go-between, and a few other contacts. Verres often sends me WhatsApp photos of his meals, and judging by the pictures, Angelo knows how to entertain. Huge plates of shrimp from the Mediterranean, grilled fish, Sicilian pastries stuffed with ricotta. But Verres isn't there for the food. He's there because Angelo has been busy. And he has news. News about a painting. Could it be the Caravaggio? All he knows at this point is that it's a stolen canvas, and it's in the hands of a criminal gang. Angelo has also been told that he and Verres might be able to get it back. When I call Verres, he's driving north on a rough winter night.
I drove from Paterno, so it's near Catania, to Cosenza, which is 4 hours. There was amazing rain, really torrential and very cold as well. Luckily, it just kept to the right side of freezing.
He's headed for a small town near Naples, where he has arranged to meet some middlemen.
Well, look, they're fairly rough characters. 3 of them, I presume they're sort of partners in crime.
It turns out he already knows these middlemen. He's sketchy with the details, but he met them during a business deal about a decade ago, and they stayed in touch.
It's almost a case of friendship, I suppose, with these people.
What he says he doesn't know is who they're working for, or how that person acquired the painting. Verres is keen to keep it that way. In this business, knowing someone's name can get you in trouble. All he knows is that the painting has some, shall we say, familiar characteristics.
So it was quite a large painting. It was cut out of the frame.
And in a few hours, in a grotty hotel in a small Italian town, he's going to find out what it is. Next time on The Professor.
I would travel without any phones at all and make sure that the car I'd be travelling in would be no chance of having a tracking device. And it would be totally anonymous. That's good because, of course, there's no comeback to anybody else beyond me.
This has been The Professor with me, Simon Willis. This podcast is written and co-created by me. The show is produced by Brazen in partnership with PRX. Rubini Bamashekar is managing producer. Susie Armitage is our story editor, and Lucy Woods is our associate producer and fact-checker. Mixing and sound design by Claire Urban. Executive producers for Brazen are Bradley Hope and Tom Wright. At Brazen, Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager. Megan Dean is our network manager. Francesca Gilardi Quadrio-Curzio is Italian research assistant and podcast strategist. Arnav Benaikia and Noor Abdel Latif are assistant strategists. Ryan Ho is the series creative director. Cover art designed by Julian Pradia. Our interpreters are Daria Bocchetti and Lawrence Mogridge. Voiceover translation from Elio Pagano and Luigi Cirillo. For more information on this podcast and other podcasts from Brazen, go to our website, brazen.fm.